Hey there, so this video is going to be essentially combining four elements, fire, water, earth, wind, together in various different permutations in order to essentially represent metaphorically the cognitive functions of the 16 types. And this video is essentially a follow-up to the cognitive functions as elements video I put out last year. We're actually taking this into a more applied state now and saying, what do each of these individual elements look like when we apply them to any one of the 16 types? So essentially the elements can be separated into internal and external planes as well as positive and negative planes. So fire, for example, represents the domain of thinking, which is kind of a cerebral process, often kind of designed to form representations in our brain of what things mean, and also kind of break down what those things mean, both externally and internally. So an external fire is a force of change upon the external world. This can be extroverted thinking, whereas introverted thinking is the actual changing of our internal representations in the internal world. So that is going to be a kind of more deep and internal fire representing introverted thinking. Water, on the other hand, is going to represent the domain of feeling. These are the kind of subcortical, limbic processes of the brain. Water that flows upon the earth is going to represent extroverted feeling. This is a water that can kind of change the hearts and minds of others, work with the motivations of others. Whereas introverted feeling is going to be more akin to an ocean, the true depths of our authentic selves. And it's kind of fitting as well because the deeper you go into the brain, the more you get into FI. The perceptual elements, on the other hand, are divided between air and earth. This is going to be intuition and sensing. So intuition is represented by air. Air is going to represent space in general and movement within space. It's going to be more cross-contextual. This is going to be the realm of possibilities, for example. That external air is going to be akin to extroverted intuition, flowing from one thing to another, like the element of wind. Whereas introverted intuition is more akin to the void, held in a kind of stasis over time. And finally we have the element of earth, which is comparable to sensing. That kind of external earth that interacts with the atmosphere is going to be more like extroverted sensing. We can see this as kind of the mountains that form upon the earth's crust, hard and unyielding, but also challenging and pushing against the sky. This is very akin to the kind of intensity of an extroverted sensing dominant, for example. Whereas that kind of introverted sensing is more akin to internal earth. This is kind of like a harder and more refined substance. It's much more like crystalline in many ways, because introverted sensing is all to do with refinement over time. So with that summary out of the way, let's dive into the video, starting with the ISTJ. So the ISTJ's dominant two elements, they are the convergent elements in CPT, are going to be that kind of introverted sensing represented by crystal, and that introverted feeling in agency position represented here by ocean. So that kind of crystalline, oceanic kind of composite can be compared to pearl. The ISTJ therefore is kind of forming this kind of pearl, beautiful structure of their two authentic selves that they are holding constant and refining with introverted sensing over time, in response to a more kind of chaotic external world represented by extroverted intuition and extroverted thinking. That's kind of wind and fire. So these guys are really kind of bracing against and really submerging against this kind of like wider inferno or sirocco of potential that they have to kind of protect themselves against. They're essentially shielding themselves against chaos. ISFJs, on the other hand, can be more compared to gemstone. They still have that kind of crystalline introverted sensing, but here it's interacting more with fire. They're kind of forging a more kind of rock-like structure rather than something more organic. And this really does encapsulate the beautiful SITI processes of the ISFJ, who often really go into the process themselves in order to really refine the edges, really kind of smooth out the contours to make something really beautiful that'll stand the test of time. And the negative element of this type is therefore wind, represented extroverted intuition, and water, represented by extroverted feelings. We're looking at the kind of raging rivers that flow upon the earth's crust that could very much disrupt the processes of this type if not handled with care. And it's always important to bear in mind these processes that types protect themselves against are also a source of inspiration for the types as well. It's actually a much more fluid fusion of processes rather than an either-or dichotomy. So those were the two crystal dominants, and now we're going to be getting into the two void dominants, that is the INTJ and the INFJ. So let's start off with the INTJ. Like the ISTJ, the INTJ holds constant that kind of darker, deeper ocean kind of process. But the dominant function to this process is the void instead of crystal. So therefore, NIFI, that is void, ocean, is a process that kind of forms a composite of abyss, essentially. It's kind of like the deep, dark, hidden recesses of the ocean itself, and really kind of encapsulates the way in which FI is held constant in order to really explore the potential of the INTJ's chosen archetype. It's a much more vast and ethereal realm of feeling. The most vast, dark and deep, I'd argue, of them all. And just as the abyss kind of carries that depth and mystery, it also kind of carries a sense of kind of dread in a lot of ways, and really encapsulates the feeling that a lot of INTJs contend with on a daily basis of really staring into the void, experiencing the whole kind of intensity of reality and kind of feeling overwhelmed by it to such an extent as to form an archetype to hold on to out of existential necessity. And the more negative elements within this type, the elements that this type kind of shields themselves against, but also draws a kind of sense of inspiration from in many ways as well, are going to be kind of earth and fire upon the Earth's crust. It's more like a kind of lava process in a lot of ways. They're really diving deep into the abyss in order to protect themselves from the kind of extreme heat and intensity of fire and earth. And a quick recap from the video of last year, these elements are dichotomously opposed, not in a kind of like strong, weak, good, bad kind of way, but more in a sense of kind of intensity and extensity. These kind of dominant elements are going to be very expansive, there's a lot of control here, whereas the opposing elements, in the case of the INTJ, is going to be earth, SE, and fire, TE. Those kind of negative elemental forces are still going to give the type a sense of grounding and a sense of warmth, but they're so sensitive to these elements that they only need it in a small dose. So therefore they create as much distance between them and the elements as possible, not to avoid them entirely, but essentially to avoid becoming overstimulated by them. The INFJ, on the other hand, is going to be void and furnace, that is, that kind of introverted intuition and the introverted thinking represented by the kind of darker, deeper, fiery processes under the Earth's crust. These processes interact in order to form a kind of heliosphere, the kind of like air and void that kind of radiates in response to the sun's temperature from however many miles away. Because again, the emphasis upon the void dominant is upon perception and experience of more diffuse energies. And the type who can be more likened to the actual sun itself, we're going to be getting into later in the video. So the INFJ therefore kind of sits upon this heliospheric experience of the solar system in many ways. And again, just like the INTJ, there's a kind of stillness here. And there's also that kind of foreboding experience the INFJ shares with the INTJ, that kind of sense of existential dread, as so much is perceived at once in a kind of eerily still kind of fashion, as to make anything and yet nothing seem possible. And whereas the INTJ's negative elements are going to be earth and fire, the negative elements of the INFJ are going to be earth and water. So like the ISFJ, the INFJ is more disturbed by the kind of gushing forces that could potentially deter them and disrupt them. But these forces are going to be much more intense. It's going to be much more like an extremely fast river, for example, really penetrating against rock. And all furnace-based types kind of need the furnace to be dry in order to keep running. Too much water is going to be akin to, the fires of Isengard being put out in the Two Towers. And now let's get to the ESTP. This is going to be earth and water flowing upon the Earth's crust. The ESTP is actually the very river, fast-flowing and intense that I was talking about in reference to the INFJ's negative elements. SEFE in many ways is all about kind of social penetration. It's about pushing boundaries in a lot of ways, experimenting and finding more social novelty upon the environment. In very much the same way that rivers and tributaries flowing fast across the earth and down a mountain, for example, are going to be really eroding the land that they're carving their channels into. But they're also going to be transporting interesting bits of information, for example, to different riverbeds. However, in order for these rivers to keep flowing, they need to stay away from the void and the furnace. They do not want to be evaporated. And they certainly don't want to lose their momentum. And similar to the ESTP, the ESFP has that kind of earth dominance. They're really challenging the skies and erecting firm structures upon the Earth's crust. They want to make an impact, just like the ESTPs do. But here the auxiliary is going to be fire. So earth and fire, they kind of combine together in order to form brimstone. It's still to the agenda of earth. It's still going to be something more solid and rocky, who is also an ESFP, I would add. but it has a more kind of fiery passion burning here. And the opposing elements here are going to be, again, that retreat from the void, from that kind of stasis and vacuum. But whereas the ESTP retreats from void and furnace, the ESFP retreats from void and ocean. They want to stand for something, they want to make an impact, and they can't afford to be dragged down into the abyss where the INTJ lays. So now let's get to the ENTP. This is going to be an air dominant, a wind dominant in many ways, with an auxiliary of water. But unlike the ESTP, this water is not characterized by rivers flowing upon the Earth's crust and kind of eroding substances through sheer turbulence and force of will. Instead, NEFE, so wind and water, is more likened to a mist or cloud. It's something that really encapsulates a broader surface. It feels more kind of like overt in its overall shape and the amount of people it can interact with at any one time, but might feel more kind of fluid and less intense than the SEFE pairing of the ESTP. And whereas the ESTP really tries to distance themselves from the void, the ENTP tries to distance themselves from becoming crystallized. They really want to continue being motile and free in the same way that one would expect a cloud to be. And also they want to avoid that introverted thinking furnace, something that can give them potential and inspiration in order to do what they do, but they don't want to be trapped into that kind of analysis spiral too much. And the ENFP is like the ENTP, going to be an air dominant, but the auxiliary here is fire instead. This can be likened to a Sirocco. This air has fiery energies. They really want to explore potential of change. It's much less to do with change itself and much more about kind of experiencing the raw potential for change. And oftentimes an idea, for example, is going to be enough for an ENFP. The potential, seeing the potential, exploring that potential, for as long as it's novel, is going to be the emphasis of their cognition, much more than change for its own sake. And naturally, since they are airborne creatures, they want to avoid becoming trapped within the Earth's crust and becoming crystallized. And they'll also want to avoid diving too deep into the oceans of introverted feeling. Because again, naturally, fire will be put out in the process. So we're halfway through the video, and those of you who are new to CPT have probably noticed a trend. First of all, I don't consider introverted feeling to be the auxiliary of the ENFP because it's facing a totally different direction. And when we look at the roles, even in other systems, assigning it like a parental role, for example, it's often aversive, it's pulling it back. It's a more negative force. It's an extremely powerful force, so it'll be very demonstrable and overt if you're measuring the behavior of the person. But in terms of cognition itself, it's not serving an auxiliary role to the dominant much as it is serving an auxiliary role to the oppositional. And this is why ENFPs are more fiery creatures and ENTPs are more watery creatures. And when you interact with enough of these types, you'll really see how much that is the case. The furnace within an ENTP is there to generate energy, action potential, and to be observed and ensure competence in their skill sets. And that introverted feeling of the ENFP, that deep ocean, is going to be more reflexive than reflective. And that's why they tend to be more impulsive and go with it and more taken up in the moment, just as ESFPs are. Exceptions for more introverted variants of ENFPs, of which there are many in this community, but this video is for more default everyday versions of the types that you tend to meet in your everyday experiences. And I'm planning to make a more alchemical video in this series in the future, talking about how elements can change in a kind of subtype way or individuation way, and life experience way, etc. Okay, rational dominance, starting with the ESTJ. So, extroverted thinking, extroverted intuition, this can be likened to fire and air. What happens when fire interacts with air? Well, typically it becomes an inferno. This is fire really raging across the Earth's crust, often feeling unstoppable in its momentum. This is fire that takes control of a lot of moving parts at once. It's very systematic in a lot of ways. But it also really needs something in order to keep its momentum going. It needs a fuel source, for example. And therefore, it'll tend to stop and start a little bit more. And the last thing this type would want to do is ever dive into the deep ocean depths, because in doing so, their inferno would be doused. And as authoritative and inspiring as that crystalline, introverted sensing authority might be for the type, the last thing they want to be doing is getting stuck within it and being held within the Earth's crust, because they need external momentum. They need the winds to carry them. And similar for the ESFJ, who is more like a kind of rainbow in many ways, really existing in the Earth's atmosphere from a kind of fusion of water and air. They can be really uplifting and inspiring to those around them, but they really need to be within that external atmosphere. They don't want to be trapped within the crystal. And in this case, they do not want to be within the furnace of introverted thinking. Because again, if they evaporate all of their water, then they can no longer do what they're designed to do. To be a beacon of hope, to connect people together, and to lift up the spirits of those who see them. And whereas ESFPs are more like brimstone, being earth dominant, ENTJs are much more like lava and magma, flowing very intentionally in an almost unstoppable manner. These types do not need momentum as much as they need willpower. And I really think lava flowing upon the Earth's crust inexorably is the perfect representation of TESE. However, they can still be doused if you take them into the void of NI and submerge them into deep, watery structures. Then they can no longer flow and leave a mark upon the world. And similarly, the ENFJ cognition is that which must survive upon the Earth's crust. As much as the void, looking at the cosmos, for example, to chart their destiny, is going to be inspiring to them. They are much more like a forest, a fusion of water and earth upon the Earth's crust. They're going to be very nurturing types, for example, and they're going to really foster a sense of life in the world around them. And as I mentioned in my recent ESTJ video, ENFJs have this TENE dip whereby they can actually really contribute to an ecosystem around them. But talking about dip functions is going to be more in the future for this elemental kind of stuff. But at the core of it, when water combines with earth, earth being more auxiliary to water, we're going to be looking at the kind of things that form from the fusion of these elements. It's not going to be earth itself as much as it is the product, the organic life that comes about from earth. And it really does give a lot of credence to the very nurturing and validating role of FESE. And naturally, this forest is going to resist the furnace at all costs. Again, I can't help throwing in a Lord of the Rings reference, because if we think about Fangorn being cut down in order to fuel the fires of Isengard, this is very much a rebellion against any form of ENFJ cognition. And as I promised I would get to, when we combine introverted thinking, that kind of furnace, with introverted intuition, the void, and it's introverted thinking that's dominant here, rather than introverted intuition, now we really are inside a star itself. Unlike the INFJ, who is more of a heliosphere, ISTPs are much more akin to a star. They're akin to a state of fusion, essentially, where introverted thinking and introverted intuition is sustaining something and it's creating its own kind of energetic fusion process. And it may continue to do so for as long as it is kind of separate from those kind of watery and earthen energies that you would find within a planet's atmosphere. It must be within space and far removed in many ways to be able to do its thing. And the INTP, by contrast, who is also that furnace dominant, is going to have an auxiliary of earth, of crystal here instead. So that kind of furnace process plus a kind of crystalline auxiliary is essentially going to create a diamond, which really encapsulates the INTP's natural process, which is to really form deeply embedded knowledge banks, but also more importantly and more noticeably, at the core of their cognition, they're going to be forming definitions. They're really distilling things down into the most quintessential essence of what something is. This is a type who really goes into that refinement process, not for the sake of beauty, for example, as the ISFJ does, not for the sake of harmony and fluidity of a process across variables, but more for the sake of the variable itself. What are we actually talking about here? And naturally, this type really needs to dig down into the crust. They cannot go up into the atmosphere. They cannot interact too much with water because, of course, water will dampen their furnaces. And the ISFP is a bit like INTJ again. But it's quite different in many ways in terms of the metaphor, because whereas INTJ is really deep down below the ocean, the ISFP is actually in space. But the emphasis is not upon space itself. Space is merely playing an assistive role in the formation of what the ISFP's cognition is really doing. They must retreat, they must really go into that void in order to synthesize their own identity, to really manifest their own ideal internally before they can take it into the external world. And so I like to liken ISFP cognition, that is ocean plus void, to that of a comet, which is really beautiful in a lot of ways, because when we think of, for example, shooting stars, we can really tap into that sense of idealism and natural hope that the ISFP cognition tends to have. It's very utopian in many ways. And the idea of frozen water travelling through the cosmos is just really awesome. And again, this is kind of ice dominance here, because the emphasis is upon the structure itself, just like irrational dominant emphasizes the structure that they're composing in their brain. And naturally, this type does not want to melt. Fire is going to be their natural opposite. They cannot be a comet when they're being superheated. And I've had ISFP clients as well who I recommend, no matter what, do not jump into the fire. It might seem appealing in the moment, but what you really need to do is sustain your own momentum and hold to your own ideals. Hold to your own shape. I know it can be tempting, for example, to jump into the fire to let yourself be remolded in a new burst of inspiration. But the key to ISFP success is often holding to the shape that they've destined for themselves. And finally, let us touch on INFP. Introverted feeling, that kind of deep ocean process interacting with crystal, can be likened to crystallized water. I like to think of a glacier for INFP. It's a really beautiful encapsulation of the natural intrinsic serenity that INFPs often exude externally. They may not necessarily feel it inside themselves, but this is often the type who has remarkable potential for innate mindfulness, harmonizing with the world around them, while also staying true to their core values, a deeper, truer sense of self underneath the synthesized self-concept. And just like the ISFP, this type does not want to be thrown in the fire. They do not want to have loads of demands thrown upon them, for example. They don't want to be overwhelmed or burned. But whereas the negative elements of the ISFP is more akin to lava and magma, the negative elements of the INFP is more akin to an inferno. This type really does not want to be swept away in the winds of an ESTJ's momentum. But as with all opposing forces, they can be nonetheless very complementary. Because again, the INFP and the ISFP, they still need the warmth of fire. But because they're so sensitive to it, they will naturally distance themselves from it. So that concludes the video. I really hope it was useful. I hope this video can reach some more people as well. I know not everybody is drawn to the kind of mechanistic, precise nature of CPT, but using this kind of more metaphorical language, I hope more people can get on board with the theory. CPT is a totally different approach to MBTI and other systems, which is why I don't refer to the system as a form of MBTI in the first place. It doesn't use dichotomies, it focuses more upon cognition. And while no system is truly static, CPT makes explicit the way in which it is not static. It talks about movement. Movement is the core emphasis of the theory itself. And we'll be getting into the movement of elements in a later video in this series. That is, for as long as people enjoyed the video and would like to see more videos like this. I also wanted to announce CPT now as a brand new website. This website is much more functional, much nicer looking, and most importantly, it has a fully functioning member section. The online course is also something I've been working on behind the scenes, and again, since it's a subscription-based model, we're looking at kind of new content added every month. But the entire first chapter is done and ready to go. So thanks again for watching the video. If you'd like to know anything more about CPT on a deeper level, I highly recommend either getting a CPT ebook or subscribing to the CPT website in order to access that wiki, or indeed both. So thanks again for watching. Again, thank you so much for your support, especially to all of my awesome Patreons and potential members of the website, and I'll be back in a week or so. For now, take care.